availability because there are going to be some witnesses being called uh, in this hearing. And if witnesses, for example, are running late, they can't be there on time, then the court would likely wait a little bit for the witnesses. So I think that's probably what's happening here, but not a big deal.
I also wanted to ask you because typically we do see Luigi Mangioni walking, shackled, but many times in civilian clothes into the courtroom itself. And I did want to bring in this live look once again for our viewers. So this is the vantage point that we typically see. This is the hallway leading into the courtroom. However, that didn't happen today. We didn't see him walk through the hallways. We just got word that he was inside the courtroom itself, bypassing that media row. Can you explain perhaps the reason behind that as we've seen him do so previously?
Yeah, my guess would be that the lawyers for Mangione are being more mindful now of using him to pander in front of potential likely jurors, for example. Like at past hearings, he's almost reveled in the fact that he's got people looking at him, and there's been an argument made by prosecutors in both the state and federal case that his lawyers are trying to pander to potential jurors. So I think that Mangione's lawyers now are a little bit more mindful of that, and they're less likely to parade him around outside the courthouse, in the hallways, to avoid being accused of trying to impact a jury pool.
And what's also interesting is we were sharing this live look with our viewers. We were seeing some supporters of his walking into the courtroom. We saw even live looks outside the courthouse as folks were donning attire. They were waving signs in support of Luigi Mangioni, lending to your point that there seems to be almost like a circus surrounding this case, and the attorneys might be mindful of that. As we take a live look, though, from inside this hallway right here, we see at least 3 police officers, and I did want to pull up once again this photo right here. So this is a photo, Brian, that Fox 5 New York provided. This was just moments ago from inside the courtroom itself, and at least from this vantage point, you can see a very heavy police presence. But as you're taking a look at it, and what I'm going
He
to do
seems
is
too
I'm actually going
happy.
to bring it in full.
What is with
for our
this man?
viewers so they can get
Smiles.
a better view of this. But when you take a look at this particular photo, Brian, you know, as this is happening, is there anything that you can extrapolate from this photo? We see that Luigi Mangioni right now is dressed in civilian attire. We see heavy police presence. He's chatting with one of his attorneys. What do you glean, if at anything, from this photo?
Yeah, great question. I think Mangione's lawyers are trying to portray him to the judge as, hey, look, he's just an average human being. He's dressed up nicely today. He's not in his orange jumpsuit. His lawyers, I think, also won a request to have at least one of his hands not be handcuffed so that he'd be able to write and take notes. So expect him to be jotting down notes as well. He's talking to his lawyers. He's being engaged. They want to portray him as, hey, look, he's just like your next door neighbor. This can't be a cold-blooded murderer. And then the police presence, is likely because of what you've mentioned at the onset, which is he's had a lot of people like wanting to say hi to him, kind of grab at him. They think he's a hero for having murdered somebody. So
It's a wild time in America.
Part of a ploy on the part of his lawyers to, in my opinion, create some type of juror nullification.
Do you think this man is a hero for assassinating the CEO of the healthcare administration people? I don't know.
With potential jurors and
it's not a good way to look about it.
Goes to trial and come off like the average guy next door, so that the jury likely ignores some of the critical, tangible forensic.
Do you think Luigi is charming
in this case, and in hope of getting 1 or 2 jurors to acquit for a hung jury?
I mean, even taking a look at this particular snapshot in time, his demeanor, his facial expression, it almost seems a little relaxed. He, is having this, conversation with his attorney who looks much more serious than him. I have to imagine his attorneys are coaching him on how to present himself to the jury. and this is a critical pre-trial hearing right now, Brian, because his attorneys are looking to get some evidence suppressed.
What do you think,
including the
people?
items in his backpack, some of the statements that he has made to police. I wanted to start with the items in the backpack first because is there a gray area in the law? Do police need to have a warrant before they search anything? Or is there a legal argument on the side of police allowing them to search before they present a warrant?
Yeah, so typically, there's really two reasons why a warrant wouldn't have been necessary here. Let's go through that. Let's talk about the backpack first and keep out the statements that he made. So usually you would customarily.
I thought if you
need
had
a
reason of
warrant
suspicion that you could
to
do that,
inspect
and
his
this man
backpack,
obviously
right?
gave people to have a reason of
Unless there is
suspicion.
what's called exigent circumstances. What does that mean? It means that the police officers felt like Mangioni might pose a risk of harm, for example, to somebody else, somebody in the McDonald's where he was picked up, where he might pose a risk of harm to them. Could there have been something in the backpack that might have caused harm to others? One of the police officers
Was it a
is gonna testify
BLT,
she
a
thought he might have a
McDouble,
bomb in the backpack, right?
a bunch
So
of tendies
if
and
there's
nuggies? This man
exigent,
could have had
this means an
firearms
immediate
and barbecue sauces all
fear of
mixed up
harm
together.
to others, then you don't usually need a warrant. Like for example, I get pulled over driving. They suspect a DUI, and they can potentially look in the back trunk of the car as well because they think I might pose a harm to others on the freeway. So that's one angle. Then look, worst case scenario here that Mangioni's lawyers win on this first argument saying, look, you didn't have a warrant, there was no exigent circumstances. The way that the prosecutors can get in this evidence on the second evaluation I'm going to make here is a standard of whether they could have gotten this evidence through a search warrant. What does that mean? Well, that means if prosecutors had waited a day and they filed a probable cause affidavit with the judge and said, we want a search warrant on Mangioni's backpack, there's no chance in a million years that a judge would not grant that. A judge is going to grant that. So the prosecutors are going to argue we would have been able to get this evidence anyway had we gone and gotten a search warrant. And that's where I think they're going to prevail on this. If I had to prognosticate, it's 50-50 on the exigent circumstances. But look, they would have been entitled to go in and search that backpack with a bona fide search warrant. So that's their other angle on how to get to the evidence there.
They're talking about what's happening in the New York City pretrial hearing where they're trying to get some of this evidence removed from the trial due to the police, his lack of confidence, obviously. Is this the first time we hear such things? Is this going to hurt the case
Right. So
against Luigi because now the strongest evidence may be removed from the trial? Very interesting.
That you have a right to remain silent. Those don't need to be administered unless there's what's called custodial interrogation. What does that mean? Well, for example, you're in a police department, right? You're in the back of a police car and you're being asked questions by a police officer. That constitutes custodial interrogation. Or for example, if Mangioni was handcuffed here and then he was asked questions, then he would need to have his Miranda rights read. But look, if he's sitting in McDonald's, right, and these police officers are having a conversation with them, they haven't handcuffed him yet, they haven't arrested him yet, then arguably they didn't need to read Miranda rights at that point. Once they handcuff him, say, hey, look, we're taking you in, then they've got to read the Miranda rights. So that it'll be important to find out this hearing, when exactly was he handcuffed, when was he brought into custody and put into the police car, and were questions asked before or after?
The little legality of details.
I'm not sure a lot of people even know that. So let's say you just have a normal conversation
Do you know your rights?
with an officer. They don't have to read you your rights. It's only after maybe they arrest you, you're put inside the police car. That is when, the clock starts ticking, I suppose, when they have to indicate that you have the right to remain silent. When you take a look at these arguments that the judge is now hearing, typically, in these arguments, does a judge traditionally side with the prosecution or defense, or is it 50-50?
Yeah, great question. I think it can't be determined in a vacuum. It's got to be looked at on a case by case analysis. The starting point for the judge on whether statements made by Mangioni come into evidence is where did it take place? Remember what we talked about. It didn't take place at the police station, so that favors prosecution. He's sitting. I saw some pictures. He's just sitting at McDonald's, and these two police officers are talking to him. Remember, I advise clients and friends, if you get pulled over and you're being questioned by the police, you don't have an obligation to respond at all. So Mangioni's having a conversation with them inside of McDonald's, so the judge is going to look at that. That favors the prosecution, right? Because it's not really custodial interrogation. And again, I think the key point is going to be, at what point do the police officers say, hey, look, we're taking you in. Hey, can you turn around? I'm going to put handcuffs on you. At
Cuff this man.
That's when it's going to trigger the Miranda rights to be read. And so I would need to hear, for example, when exactly was he handcuffed? When was he told he was going to be taken into the station for further?
You're going to be taken into Bowser's custody.
Continue to ask him.
Where's your brother Mario, Luigi?
So does the line of questioning
We've been looking for you.
Impact or influence any of this? Could the police have even asked him point blank, did you kill Brian Thompson? But they haven't handcuffed him yet, and then he responds. Could that, be prior to? So the line of questioning doesn't have anything to do with it. It's about whether he is in, custody, so to speak.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's what.
So it's not the line of questioning and his answering those questions, it's whether he was in custody when they asked those questions.
Cold blood allegedly murdered Brian Thompson, and you see him sitting at a McDonald's. If I'm a cop, I'm gonna walk in there. I'm gonna chum up with this guy. I'm gonna order an egg McMuffin, sit down, chat with him, not tell him we're taking you into the station, not telling him you're under arrest, and let's see if he's smart enough to not say anything. So they could have clearly asked him before handcuffs, before saying I'm taking you into the police station, did you kill Brian Thompson? Is this shell casing we found, does that match what you have inside your backpack? If he made any kind of admission of guilt prior to police, detaining him, putting him in handcuffs, taking him into the station. Look, prosecutors are going to be all over that, and they're going to say that's fair game. That's an admission of guilt.
So is this almost like the last chance opportunity for the defense as they're trying to, get some of these legal wins? Are they just exhausting, every option and kind of just throwing something at the legal wall, seeing if it sticks?
Well, look, you've got to weigh what's in that backpack, right? To prove a murder case, it's critical to have the weapon, and it's allegedly in the backpack. So the evidence that you're talking about this hearing is absolutely crucial. I mean, this is going to have an effect on the federal case as well. This ruling will likely affect the federal case. So look, prosecutors got to be very serious about this. They have got to make sure to ensure that physical evidence, right? It's the silencer that was found too. The gun that was in the backpack that matches, by the way, through ballistics, the shell casings that were found at the scene of the crime. I mean, if you're going into a murder trial, you want to have all that tied together.
Was this handled terrible in order to get the most criminal evidence out of the courts against Luigi Mangioni? You got to wonder.
At the end of the day, if they lost it, I don't think that's going to happen. I think ultimately the judge is going to not exclude it. But let's say the judge did. They still do have some, physical evidence at the scene of the crime that ties Mangioni to the shooting as well.
And Brian, I'm curious because, as you mentioned, these decisions, aren't made in a vacuum. For this particular judge, do you have, any indication from the previous?
We get ready to close out this show. We get ready to charge up the phone, and we're gonna run this back at around
Yeah, that's
1
another great question because
to
I,
3
frankly,
o'clock,
I was
somewhere in the area
surprised
of range.
by
Hopefully,
this
gonna be
judge's
there.
previous ruling to throw
And
out
I just want you to do
the
one thing for me.
terrorism
People
charge. Now,
remember
remember,
me.
Mangione was charged in state court with
Oh,
murder
handling
for
the